Alrighty, guys. You guys voted and you guys want to see it. Can Cain survive as a fledgling vampire in the Warhammer Fantasy universe? Well, this is going to be a very interesting discussion. It's going to be kind of a long one, so strap your butts in, get ready for a car crash, because this thing's going to go crashing and burning. Let's go. So, to start things off, let's first talk a little bit about Cain and his powers and his capabilities. You see, despite being a fledgling vampire, he's got some insane buffs that are going on around here. Now, by fledgling vampire, I'm going to take him as a vampire at the end of the Blood Omen game, because he's still a fledgling by that point. Literally, he's only been a vampire for like maybe less than a year. According to the game devs, the course of the Blood Omen game is supposed to be like almost a year long. So, hey, makes sense to me. I mean, you just traveled across the entire world to kill very powerful people. So, yeah, it probably did take your ass a year. But still, here we are with Cain and his powers. Now, Cain has a lot of gifts. A lot. First, we'll start with the most interesting gift. The gift that I would argue may be a little too powerful, but I'm going to allow it for now to exist in this Versus series just because there are very similar vampires with similar items. So that's going to be the Black Heart of Janos Audron. Now you see, Cain did not know that he had this gift, but he does. The Black Heart simply restores him full. Now, what this Black Heart basically does is it puts unlife into a body, whatever body it's placed in. And we see that if you actually remove Cain's heart, which is actually the Black Heart, it doesn't kill him. It just really, really incapacitates him. It puts him in a really weakened state, but he can still recover and get back up and keep fighting. This is very important for later on, as a sort of weakness to Cain is the heart. Now, besides that, we have some few other items. One, he's got iron armor on, head to toe. But he doesn't have just that. He has so many armors at his disposal. He's got chaos armor, flesh armor, bone armor. And I'm going to leave it to you viewers to look up these armors and see what they do. But bottom line is that he's got a lot of armors that can deal with a lot of situations. Some armors are really good against demons. Some armors are really good against undead. Some armors are really good against just humans in general. Some of these armors are incredibly tough. Some of these armors are kind of useless. But they definitely have their place in certain situations that Warhammer Fantasy definitely has. Now that we just talked about his armors, we also have to look at his weapons. What is it that he's going to be cleaving his opponents with? And this is where it gets really cool. Alright, so let's get the cat out of the bag. He's got the Soul Reaver. We know what the Soul Reaver does. It obliterates souls and mortals at the same time. It's a massive two-hander weapon that within a swing can revitalize a vampire's strength because the sword drinks blood for you, but it also destroys your opponent's souls. So it kind of ignores armor in a sense. That is great. But the thing is that the sword itself is not really his most powerful weapon in his arsenal. In fact, if you play the game, you'll kind of realize that it's a really heavy sword and that fledgling Cain needs to like slowly swipe with the damn thing. So it's not really a weapon that I would rely upon too much. But there is a lot of power in it, especially when Cain gets older and much stronger. He starts to wield the thing one-handed, and he just starts whacking away with this thing like as if it's a weed killer. Like he's just whack, 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 whack. It's great, but just not right now because he's a fledgling. So let's look at his other weapons. He's got his iron sword, which is fine. It's just a regular sword, but now it's in the hands of a fledgling vampire who's got better strength, better intelligence, better reaction speed. Okay. That's pretty good. Well, he also has the flaming sword. Now, the flaming sword is really interesting, and I actually like this weapon. Because, one, it actually disintegrates bodies, and it's really good against the undead. So if Cain was to fight a horde of skeletons, or a horde of ghouls, or whatever, this is what he would rely upon. It would disintegrate their bodies entirely. It would make it where there's nothing left to recover. This would hurt necromancers and other vampires in the Warhammer Fantasy universe very considerably, because now there's nothing to bring back from the dead. Then we also have his axes. axes known as Havoc and Malus. Now, these two axes are one, they make you go into a spinning death frenzy where you just start spinning away and you just start cleaving people's heads off, which is amazing. And for those of you who do not know, there's actually an orc, a savage orc in Warhammer Fantasy, who was known for spinning. And that was his whole battle tactic. He would lead an entire army, and all he did was he just spun with his weapon and just cleaved people's heads off. Until finally a chaos guy cleaved his head off, in which case his body still spun a little bit more before it fell down and cleaved a few more dudes. So Cain having 2 axes instead of 1, and he's spinning, is pretty significant. In fact, these axes are so strong that they're able to cleave trees with ease. That's pretty scary. So now you have this guy who's spinning around, hacking heads off, but he's also hacking trees down too, effortlessly. Yeah, these axes are no joke. These axes are something that I would probably use a lot because, hey, if you're just cleaving down trees left and right, and it doesn't matter what kind of tree it is, you're just cleaving it down. It could be an oak tree, timber tree, whatever, pine, doesn't matter. This axe will ruin its day. That's amazing. That is an amazing weapon right there. The last weapon that we are going to talk about is the one that I think is kind of more useful in a utility sense. It's not really much of a weapon per se, it's more of a utility. Is going to be the mace. Now, the mace is pretty interesting because one hit from it can destroy a boulder. One hit of it could destroy a large, big-ass boulder that's blocking your way. Just one. That's all it takes, and it can turn something into pebbles. It's an amazingly strong mace. That's great. Now, what effect does it do on a person? Well, simple. One hit from this, and it just knocks you out cold. And then Cain could just drink all of your blood without having to accidentally spill any blood. That sounds good, but in a setting where you're fighting hordes and hordes of humans, vampires, rats, orcs, you don't really have time to be doing that. In a one-on-one situation, I could see it being useful where you just knock an elector count off his tuchus and make him stunned as you just drain his blood. That's great, but that's really not something you want to risk with. So now that we talked about that, let's talk about his magic. Now he has a lot of spells, like a lot of magic. The first one's Energy Bolt, and this one's pretty simple. He just casts an Energy Bolt. Boom. It does quite a bit of damage. It takes about 2 or 3 of these to make a human just explode. So 2 or 3 of these to make a human explode, doesn't matter if they're wearing armor or not. You can imagine what this is going to do to a human in the Warhammer setting, where it's probably going to do the exact same thing. Now we have his other abilities. One of them is Shield. Now Shield is pretty interesting because it blocks everything. It blocks weapons, it blocks poison, it blocks lava, it blocks water, it blocks everything. So Cain is pretty much immune to all forms of damage when he activates this spell. Very odd, but hey, pretty useful. Up next, right next to the shield spell, is the opposite. It's called Repel. And it's only good against mages. And this one's actually very important that I want you guys to pay attention. Repel reflects magic back at the caster. That's all it does. So if Cain is fighting someone like a necromancer or a fire mage and they decide to send a burning head or a purple son of Xerxes at him, all he's got to do is cast Repel and this thing bounces back to them. It's like, oh my god. That's really powerful in the Warhammer setting, but funny enough, in the Blood Omen game, it's actually not that useful. It's really not. But here in the Warhammer fantasy setting, it would actually be devastating. Imagine that. You're trying to cast a spell like just summon a giant fire tornado. All of a sudden the fire tornado summons on your location because you summoned it on top of him. It's like, oh my god, that's scary. That is very interesting indeed, though, that here's this fledgling vampire. He's just a fledgling. He's basically slightly stronger than a human, but he's got such powerful magics at his disposal. He can easily overrule your most powerful magicians like Teclis, because he just reflects it back. Then we have the spell called Inspire Hate, which is a pretty interesting spell. Basically makes everybody frenzy, and everybody just starts killing each other. Then we also have our stun spell, our incapacitate spell. Basically, it locks the person in place, but they're fully conscious. They can see what Kane's about to do. You also have control mind, where he controls somebody. Now, here's where we get into some very interesting ones. Oh yeah, before I forget, he's also got lightning spell, which is basically a better energy bolt. But here we have blood gout. Now, essentially what blood gout is Cain uses blood from his own body and he like throws it at an enemy, which completely ravages them. But then the blood returns back to Cain, refilling his HP. Very strong indeed. But don't worry, we're just getting started. There's a lot of blood spells. The next one is blood shower. Essentially what this does is that anytime he's surrounded by a bunch of enemies, he could cast blood shower. And what blood shower is going to do is it's going to suck all the blood into himself from all the enemies. That could be good, but as the game warns you, if you're surrounded by like undead or whatever, or there's one monster that's undead, you're going to ingest poison blood along with all the other blood. And that could be very deadly and very detrimental to your survival. Now, up next is another incapacitate spell called Spirit Death. And Spirit Death is essentially a spell where he replaces the soul inside someone's body. He literally displaces it. He pushes it like out. Kind of like a master magician would in a certain Marvel universe. But that's essentially what this spell does. He pushes it out. And now you're left vulnerable. Your body is vacant. You're just sitting there. Your mind is numb. And Cain could do with as he pleases. It's a very expensive spell, not going to lie, and it costs a lot to use. So it's not very viable compared to like stun or incapacitate. But hey, he's got it. So now we're done talking about his magic. And you can tell he's got a lot of really powerful magic. He's also got something that's called forms. And forms are very unique. The first form, which I think is the most important, is his mist form. Mist form is stated to be his gift, where he just simply turns into a pile of mist and he's immune to all damage. It's very useful because we see it in Legacy of Kain Defiance on how he uses it as like a dodge. He just simply fades away into a mist and just appears to the left or goes backwards or goes forward. And that's about it. He uses like a skipping ability. In the game, we also see that he uses it in Blood Omen 1 at least. He uses it as a way of transporting himself to areas that he could not reach. Like if there's no bridge, he'll just mist over the area and get to the other side. This is very important when it comes to Warhammer because there may be chasms or canyons that he cannot traverse, but because he's got mist, he could just simply glide over this real quickly. Now, if he's going to do long distance traveling, this is where we get into his bat form. This is kind of like a Von Karstein thing, but he can use bats. He can turn himself into just a jumble of bats and then reappear at a location that he's familiar with, and that's the key term. He has to familiarize himself with the location in order to teleport himself as a bat to these locations. Very interesting indeed, and it seems like as a bat form, he doesn't suffer penalties to the light. Like, he does this all the time in the game, and every time you transform into a bunch of bats, you don't seem to take HP damage despite the fact it's raining or the sun is out. So yeah, I would say he's pretty much invulnerable in this state. The last form that's more interesting than not, just because we don't see it ever again, is his wolf form. His wolf form is devastating because one, he's super fast, and two, he's able to attack at a longer range. This would put him on a very interesting scale where he can swipe at opponents 2 tiles away or possibly more. The last thing that I wouldn't really consider a form, more of a spell, is his disguise. He's able to disguise himself perfectly to a T. This is more of your Lamian sisterhood kind of spell, where he's able to blend in with society perfectly and have 0 issues. The only thing is that if he starts doing certain things or if he starts getting thirsty, he's going to have to drop the disguise in order to feed or in order to attack, in order to defend himself. So this is where that spell is kind of useless. Now, if you think we're done talking about Fledgling Cain, you are damn wrong. You see, there's a lot of things that Cain gets throughout the game that is very unique because they are given to him through these blood altars. And these blood altars simply reduce the negative effects of being a vampire. Now, normally a vampire would just age and then they would get over it. But Cain had a faster way of getting over these weaknesses, like his weakness to sunlight, his weakness to rain. He's still weak to water, but rain he is not weak to. There's a few other weaknesses that more or less vampires suffer from that he has gone over only because he's drinking from these blood shrines that are hidden throughout the world. And he's also gained strength from them. Some of them just simply increase his mana so he can cast more spells. Some of them increase his HP so he can just have more HP. This is the final buffs that he's got. And with that, we have a pretty good picture of what Cain is. He is very fucking powerful. Despite being a fledgling, he is very, very, very powerful. And if any vampire in the Warhammer Fantasy universe was as powerful with this many relics on them, they would definitely be a target. One, a target of apprenticeship by other vampires, and two, as a target as a potential threat by the other vampires. So it's kind of a if and if. Some of them are going to see you as a friend, some of them are going to see you as a foe. Question is, which one is it that Cain would fall under? Now we're going to dive into it. Him dropped off in the Warhammer Fantasy universe. Zoom, boom. He's done. He's there. Ta-da. Welcome to Warhammer, buddy. Good luck surviving. Let's talk about what's going to happen. So we have to think here. What would be a good spot to drop off our little friend? What would be a good spot to drop him off that wouldn't get him killed right away? So, again, he's not weak to snow. He's not weak to rain. He's not weak to other things that other fledgling vampires would die from. He is weak, though, to big bodies of water and more or less being impaled and burned at the stake. Being burned is definitely going to kill him. So, dropping Cain off, where would be a good spot? Lustria is obviously a bad spot. Lustria would be just terrible. The reason why is because there's not much there other than Lizardmen and Skaven. And Cain already being aloof as to where he's at would definitely throw him in for a real curveball when he's stuck in an area that doesn't have any humans whatsoever. Nowhere to familiarize himself with, just nothing but really powerful mages who could shape the continent and dinosaurs all over the place. Yeah, no, this is not a good idea. Especially since Cain cannot raise the undead or raise an army like typical vampires. He's very vulnerable and very helpless. So this leaves the next one. What about the Darklands? Or what about Nagaroth? Well, no. Vampires and Dark Elves do not mix. Vampires and Chaos Dwarves, they do not mix. They definitely are going to get very hostile very quickly and try to enslave him and use him as just a guinea pig. And in the Chaos Dwarf situation, they're just going to enslave him and sacrifice him. And especially with their fire magics, that's a big no-no. You definitely don't want to mix vampires with fire magic. So, what about Cathay? Well, Cathay could work, especially Nippon, but the problem is that we don't know enough about it in the lore. Now, we do know a lot because of Total War Warhammer 3, but we still don't know much about it, about how their society really works, and the way that they govern themselves to really adequately say, oh yeah, Cain would do this, and to avoid this government branch's jurisdiction, he would do that. We also don't know what vampires they have, if they had any at all. We do have hunches that one vampire in particular may have migrated over to Cathay and created his own coven, but we've never seen them, like, ever. So, we do hear stories, though, about people wearing silk robes that have blood coming out of their mouth with, like, blood statues and stuff like that guarding them. So, yeah, it sounds very vampire-esque. Lords of the Dead summoning the dead in Cathay, but we just don't know who they are. So, no, we're not going to do Cathay. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry, my weeaboos. I'm sorry, guys. As much as I love Cathay, we can't talk about that. So this leads with the rest of the civilized world. Badlands, no. The Southlands, no. Same reason as Lustria. Lustria with Lizardmen, Skaven, and now you have a few other things there, like it's just a blazing hot desert. No. This would be a little too deadly for our young Cain. In the Badlands, nothing but orcs and goblins who love to fight, and here they have a vampire who's really good at fighting. That's not a good idea. Just because eventually Cain's just going to be surrounded. And sure, he has very powerful magics to survive. which I have no doubt he could. So let me preface this. The Badlands is not an area that I don't expect Cain to survive. The Badlands is just simply an area that I just don't think is optimal. Here we have Cain surrounded by orcs and goblins, constantly being attacked, constantly drinking their blood, constantly using his very powerful spells in case he gets surrounded. Like, he's able to shield himself, he's able to cast the blood shower and just suck all the blood out of everybody around him. I have no doubt he could kick some ass. He could even probably destroy a few black orcs. I have no doubt about that. My issue is that it's not a very good start when you just get teleported to a random universe and already you're being attacked from all sides. That's my that's my complaint, because I just don't think that's a really good start to a vampire. Especially when to a vampire you want to know society, you want to know things about the world before you start doing things. And Cain definitely is one of those people where he can charge in and deal with the matter firsthand. So being in the Badlands is not a bad idea. But the issue is that it's not optimal. And we see that Cain does sometimes prefer to know what he's stumbling into before he actually goes and does it. Like, he seeks out advice from the Oracle after he charges into Malik's Bastion and gets absolutely obliterated. So he seeks the Oracle afterwards. He's like, that wasn't a good idea. I shouldn't be just charging into people's areas. And he kind of learns from it. But he still has that ego. He still has his arrogance. So when it comes to the Badlands, I have no doubt that Cain, we could just drop him off there and he would just simply go to the nearest orc and goblin, demand answers out of them. And then a fight ensures, and then he survives, and he just keeps walking until he finds civilization, whether that be dwarves or the border princes. But I'm pretty much guessing it's going to be the border princes. So let's get on to that. That's the next location. The border princes, Miragliano, Estalia. What about those? What about those areas in particular? The city-states, more or less. I think Cain would do pretty decently here. Here we have a territory that's ripe with knowledge, ripe with mercenaries, ripe with bandits all over the place, ripe with dangers like orcs and beastmen. This is home. This is just like Nosgoth for Cain. This is exactly what Cain would be more used to. Very loose strictures of government, where it's basically just whatever a count says or a wannabe king says. Mercenaries all over the place that he could easily snack on and dine upon. This is beautiful. This is exactly what he needs. Now, the only dangers with the border princes and Miragliano and Estalia is that they actually have quite a significant Knights of More presence, and that could be a bit of a danger by itself, because the Knights of More specialize in fighting the undead. And here's Cain, an undead, seeking refuge, and he may decide to seek refuge inside a mausoleum, much like his own, where that way he can cast a spell, teleport himself into a mausoleum to regain his ground, to regain his bearings. Well, in doing so, he's now been basically an enemy of the Knights of More, who believe that mausoleums are sacred, that the dead should stay dead, that there's nothing that should interfere with graves and mausoleums at all. Here's Cain, on the other hand, a vampire who would thrive off of such a situation. This is where I believe Cain could definitely situate himself. While the border princes and Estalia and Miragliano are all city-states and are constantly warring against each other, constantly hiring mercenary bands, constant bandits who are basically ex-mercenaries who now have no work because the wars are over. It's just a constant circle. With this, Cain is able to pry information out of people. With this, Cain is able to divulge himself and gain knowledge on what exactly he has stumbled into. And people who are usually here are usually more world aware than someone who would be per se from the Empire or Bretonnia. The reason being is that they've probably been from everywhere. They've probably been veteran soldiers in such and such locations. Or they escaped Bretonnia and decided to come live here where they're a free man, and now they use their good martial skills to the test. Blah, blah, blah. So if Cain had came from the Badlands, completely engorged in blood, which, by the way, I forgot to mention, the more blood Cain drinks, the stronger he gets. Like, that's just Legacy of Cain vampires in general, is that the more blood they drink, the better they get. So, if Cain killed hordes and hordes of goblins, hordes and hordes of orcs, black orcs, whatever, and he kept drinking their blood and surviving with the amazing weapon arsenal and amazing magic he's got, which I have no doubt he could, then yeah, he's going to be very strong by this point. It's going to take quite a bit of enemies to bring him down. And it's not because of him being an elder or nothing. It's just because he's a fledgling who's very, very augmented from what he has just consumed. Now, when he gets older, that's where it gets more scary, because that's when his skin becomes as hard as steel, so he doesn't need his armor anymore. So, back to the thing though. With him being as strong as he is in the Border Princes, and now he's dining on unsuspecting mercenary bands, unsuspecting beastmen hordes, or unwilling bandits, he has definitely secured himself a nice power net where he could just keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger. After all, by this point, Cain views himself as a dark god. Let's just say he completed the entire Blood Omen in one thing. He views himself as a dark god, and that it's his right to rule. Here's where he can definitely set himself up, where for the next few hundred years, he just simply bides his time, dining on so-and-so amount of people, and occasionally, from the money he's gained from pilfering their bodies, he could potentially disguise himself and go into one of the cities and try to buy tomes of knowledge, tomes of lore, dive into what it is that he is not good at, which is magic, learn how to manipulate the winds of magic that he has never utilized before. Before, magic seemed to have come from him. Now, in this universe, magic comes from the wind, not from you, strictly. And here he can learn as much as he wishes, as much as he pleases. Cain is vastly intelligent. We have to remember he deciphered the inscriptions on Mobius's time streaming device without anything. No little handbook, no little instruction book. He deciphered it by himself. So here we're talking about a hyper-intelligent guy who can translate things without the need of a translator, without no intermediate between the two languages. He's able to decipher these own runes and scriptures, and he's able to figure things out on how to use something as complicated as a time streaming device. So the idea that he can decipher and understand magic in this world, I think is totally a realistic expectation. Him being a vampire does give him magical properties. He should be able to manipulate the winds of magic. He just needs to know how. And this is where him disguising himself perfectly and using the money he's gained from killing all these people to buy tomes of knowledge, he could become very powerful indeed. The only issue is that he is going to leave a scent behind that vampire hunters and vampires are going to pick up on. And this is where it gets really interesting with Cain, is that Cain can definitely see when another vampire is helping him out. Like, for instance, he may go into a city, he may go into Miragliano, for example, trying to buy a book, and all of a sudden he hears from the locals that a vampire hunter is here from the Empire. And he knows, because he's been interrogating people, he knows, oh, vampire hunters? Okay, I better watch myself. I better walk away from this city because I don't want my presence to be known. But at the same time, I would love to engage in this vampire hunter and see what he knows. All of a sudden, he hears people eavesdropping saying, yeah, the vampire hunter came, he rested at some tavern, and now he's gone. No one knows where he went. Cain can easily sit there and go, there's an invisible hand helping me out. So the vampire hunter knows that I'm around here. Someone else knows that I'm around here. But more importantly, someone who wants to keep me secret. This is where Cain can easily start to decipher the web and start to see something is amiss. Maybe there's Lamian sisterhood inside the vampires, inside the city of Miragliano. Maybe there's Von Karstein who has his eye on him. Maybe there's a Blood Knight who sees the raw potential Cain has and goes, he could help me kill a dragon. Definitely. This is what Cain has now stepped into, is he's now understanding the way the Empire works. He's also understanding the way that the world works. But he also now knows that there's other vampires watching out for him, and he might not like that. He might not like it at all. After all, when Vorador helps him in Blood Omen 2, he more or less spits at him and goes, I don't need your help. I'm fine. And this could definitely lead to some altercations. This is where we have something like Vlad von Karstein, or Conrad von Karstein or Manfred von Karstein. They're very cunning individuals when they choose to be, but they do have magical items on them that are very powerful, if not as powerful as Cain. Like Vlad, we talked about him. We talked about how he's got the von Karstein ring, and the von Karstein ring allows him to resurrect. It takes a few days. It could take him 2 days, it could take him 3 days, but he will resurrect, and it gives him a lot of power. So if we're talking about Vlad versus Cain, it would be very weird because they both are immortal. The only difference is that Cain resurrects instantly. The moment you defeat him, he just rises back up. And Cain doesn't even realize that he died. He just thinks that he's strong enough to endure all this crazy things that are being done to him. Vlad, on the other hand, he would be definitely killed laying like a corpse on the ground. And Cain could definitely assume that he's dead. But reality is that he's resurrecting. Even if you burn his corpse, he will resurrect. Whereas Cain, if you burn Cain's corpse, he will stay dead. He will be permanently dead. And this is where it comes to the whole idea of who could win in such a scenario. Could Vlad take on Cain, even as a fledgling? And the issue is that it's one, the armor, and one, it's the weapons. Then you also have the magic, which Vlad wasn't much of a sorcerer per se. He was capable of summoning undead for sure, but he was more of a swordsman. And then when we see Cain, we see much the same, where he's not much of a sorcerer. He has very powerful magics that could definitely help him, whereas Vlad does not have that kind of spells. Vlad has more like basic blood magic, basic undead magic, but he doesn't have the magic that Cain would be using, the magic like energy magic, where he's able to shield himself, or the ability to repel attacks. So if Vlad decides to use a Spirit Leech spell on him, which he doesn't know how to use anyways, but if he does, Cain could just reflect it back. And then if there's a few other situations like Cain starts to get weak, he can easily dart his blood into Vlad's body and then suck it back out. These are very powerful magics that, again, Vlad would not have. But at the flip side, Vlad is much older and Vlad has much stronger stats, I would say, than Cain. Like, he's able to overpower Cain, and he may be even a little faster. But this does even out the playing field, where Cain has his armor, he has his weapons, and he has his magic. Vlad just has his speed, his blade. His blade is super amazing. It's just like the Soul Reaver in a sense, but in this case, it just simply rips someone's soul apart. And then that's about it. So when it comes to a battle between these two, like let's say Vlad is the one who is actually secretly helping Cain, I have no doubt Cain would say he doesn't need his help, and Vlad would find him amusing and would offer him to sincerely join the von Karsteins. After all, Cain is a nobleman. Cain is charismatic to a sense. Cain inspires people to lead or follow him. This would definitely strike me as a von Karstein. The only issue is that I would easily see Cain saying, I don't want to join your damn little go-to party or whatever. I want to create my own thing. And that's going to put a giant red target on his back for all of the undead world, as now everyone's going to view him as a threat. Because one thing that vampires hate already is they hate each other. But now here's an upstart who's creating his own lineage because technically he's not their kind of vampires. That's a threat. Especially when they realize that he is just a fledgling. He's only been a vampire for a year, and look how powerful he is. Dear God, imagine if he created his own bloodline, and they're all just like him. Yeah, no. They would not be taking them that many chances, and they would try to kill him the best they could. And here's where I could see Cain going on a journey into Sylvania and just simply bringing about ruin and destruction to any vampire he could find. Problem is that Cain's not used to the Warhammer setting. And this is where I would say this could ultimately be his end. Is that while he may be able to take on certain vampires head on, like Conrad or even possibly Manfred, the issue is that he cannot take on Warhammer armies by himself. It's much like when the Battle of the Nemesis. Cain could do good. He could be the last man standing, killing targets left and right, and he could be the last guy standing. The problem is that in Sylvania, he is talking about unlimited hordes of undead. Thankfully, he's got the fire sword where he's just destroying them permanently. But the issue is that he has no blood to drink if he gets wounded. So this becomes an issue. Yeah, he could just keep resurrecting from the Black Heart, but eventually he's going to get overwhelmed, outnumbered, and then on top of that, vampires are now starting to attack him along with the undead, whether they're ghouls, cryptors, vargeist, vargulfs, souls, and spirits coming at him. Then now he's going to be pinned down, and eventually the vampires are going to say, just rip his heart out, because obviously we can't seem to kill him no matter what. And then when they rip his heart out, they realize that that's his power source. And they're going to realize that his heart is very powerful, and they may keep it as a magical artifact for themselves. This would be the death of Cain. This right here is Cain's own arrogance and his own refusal to bow down to anybody, and his own refusal to accept help that would get him killed by, ironically, vampires. So, that's Cain in the Border Princes area and the Badlands area, if he started there. What about if he started in the Empire or Bretonnia or possibly in the Chaos Lands? What would happen then? Well, they're all going to meet the same end where eventually someone's going to help him and he's going to realize it's vampires, and when he tracks it down to its source, he's not going to like them and they're not going to like him. But the introductions are going to be a little different. Like, I think if Cain starts in the Empire or in the Chaos Lands, it's going to be a much harder beginning for multiple reasons. Whereas Bretonnia, it's going to be a much easier beginning than, per se, some of the others. But not as easy as the Border Princes. Like, the Border Princes, I think, is just beautiful. That area there, all city-states, all waging war on each other, and then there's orcs and shit all around that area. That's beautiful for Cain. He's used to that. But here, a more unified government, that's not exactly a good thing for Cain. That's not exactly a good start. You see, in the Empire, they are very, very used to vampires if we're taking place after Vlad's death. If Vlad von Karstein's dead and Conrad's dead, then they actually have many tools at their disposal to kill vampires. They have silver bullets, they have these crazy light magic devices that just amplify the powers of a light mage to the point that it's like being hit with the sun itself. They have a lot of crazy spells. They even have a few artifacts in their own reliquaries that could just dispel death magic instantly. So this is where it becomes a bit deadly. And this is where it becomes a bit harder for Cain to survive in the Empire. Because one, everyone knows what he is. And two, there is a bit of, I would say, national government oversight when it comes to people dying. And if people are just dying randomly and they're dying with prick marks on them, or they're dying where their blood is completely drained but their bodies are left intact, that only points to one thing, and that's definitely going to draw more vampire hunters. Whereas the Border Princes, you'd only see maybe one because it's outside their jurisdiction. In the Empire, you would see hordes of them. You would see like 20 of these guys showing up at your door with Imperial attachments to them. So now you're fighting them and like 50 or 60 swordsmen right behind them, who are the muscle. This is a very dangerous game for Cain to start in. And this would be an area where Cain would more or less have very little option in learning about the world, learning about really anything, because you have to think about it. What does an average day-to-day Empire citizen know about the world? If Cain asked them questions, they pretty much know a few things about maybe the Emperor, like Karl Franz, but they really wouldn't know too much, and they wouldn't really know like the political inworking. They may know who they're at war with, maybe. But the thing with the Empire citizens is that they're not illiterate, they're not dumb. It's just that life is so difficult, they don't have time to worry about national prerogatives. They don't have time to worry about national politics. They just simply have to worry about their province, what's going on in the province. It's kind of like the United States, where if I ask someone what's going on in America, they can answer me all these questions about it. That's great, because their life isn't that hard. But if it was tougher times, like let's say the 1800s, then you go ahead and ask an American, hey, what's going on in the world? They wouldn't even know what's going on in their own state. They're more concerned about local affairs, what's going on in the town, what's going on in the city. That's more their concern. They don't know maybe who their president is even. Not joking, in the 1800s, it actually wasn't that common for people to know who their president was. In fact, very few people voted at all. So, when it comes to the Empire, I would imagine it's much the same, where life is so difficult, life is so hard, that when Cain tries to pry information out of people, they seem kind of simple. They seem kind of idiots, kind of like almost Bretonnian peasants. But they know a little bit more. They know like who their elector count is. They know what sort of festivities is going on. They know what's going on more or less around their province, but they're not too sure. Like they may know that the province Sylvania has some weird wickedness coming from it, but they're not really too sure as to why. Whereas the entire empire knows, hey, vampires own that area, don't go near it. That's what I'm talking about. It's more about local knowledge versus national knowledge. And in Estalia, and in Merigliano, Lucini, in all those cities in the Border Prince area, you would know that stuff. You would know about the world because, again, these are veteran troops coming from these areas who are very world aware, but not here in the Empire. So this puts Cain in a very bad situation. Also, Cain has to deal with a lot of knights. Like you have the Knights of Moor who also exist here in the Empire, but now you have the Knights of the Blazing Sun, the Knights of the Black Panther, the Reichsguard. You have a lot of knights, and these knights are no joke. They're very easy to overpower a human, and they can go toe-to-toe with even blood dragons in some instances. So here you have Cain as a fledgling, with all of his powers and cool, that's great, but now you're dealing with certain knight houses who could be augmented with enchanted gear, and they could be very, very deadly, especially for someone who has no idea what the hell they are. Like, he may just be wandering around the forest and stumble across a knight wearing full black armor, and now realize that these are Knights of the Black Panther, and that if he kills them, it's going to attract the entire, like, chapter house's attention to this area. This is what I'm talking about. The Empire is an okay start, but the problem is that it's not a good start. The Empire has way too much going on for someone like Cain to really survive. He can. It would be very difficult. But in the end, eventually he's going to catch the eye of either 100 vampire hunters, or he's going to catch the attention of 100 vampires. And they're not really a good win-win situation here. This is like a really bad situation no matter what way you cut it. Especially with all the mages around. And you have certain mage orders who are able to decipher where this magic is coming from. It's not a good picture. With all the relics they have, it's definitely a death sentence for Cain. So, what about the Chaos Lands? What about the Chaos Waste? What happens then? Well, Cain's dropped off in the middle of the snow. You would think snow would kill him, but nope. Remember, he drank those blood shrines, and those blood shrines actually get him an immunity to the snow, which is great. That's awesome. That's awesome. That's what we need. If not, he would have just died right then and there. But he is now in the middle of the snow. No one really seems to be willing to talk. Some villages he may come across may be more willing to talk to him because they see him as a very strong enemy. But more than likely or not, everyone's going to try to start a fight with him, just like the orcs and the goblins. The only difference is that now he can gain strength with these tribes. He can beat them down, and then they start to follow him, because that's just what Norskins do. They follow the strong. They may know that something's weird with Cain, like, hey, he's drinking blood, but Cain could just simply rule over them with his mighty fist. He wouldn't get strong, by the way. He would probably own, like, maybe a tribe, but it's not exactly what Cain wants either. He wants to own civilized people. He wants to go where civilization is. He wants to learn about the world. He wants to learn about the magic they use. And here, Norska is going to be a bit of a problem. One, they're not very literate. But two, the Chaos Warriors who may descend down on him as a challenge may be a little too strong. Especially when Cain fights them and he realizes that they're using powers of some gods that he has no idea of. Some of them have axes that brandish fire. So it's like, oof, that's scary. Alright. I have no doubt Cain could kill them. I just have strong doubts that Cain would be able to survive for long once he realizes what he's dealing with, which is an endless tide of believers who are being augmented with their belief. And here's Cain, who believes in some sort of god, which seems to be himself, and that's not enough. You need something stronger in order to be fighting against literal gods. And here's where we see Cain would suffer quite an immense deal and would have to leave into the Empire territory, which, again, we already covered. The Empire is not a good idea either. Now, again, some people may not like me for saying that, but the issue is that I have no doubt Cain could kill, let's say, Sigvald the Magnificent. I have no doubt he could kill him. No doubt in my mind. I have no doubt he could kill probably Throg. No doubt in my mind. He probably could. Wulfric the Wanderer? Yeah, he could probably do it. The problem is not him killing them. The problem is that him fighting off immense tribes. You see, the tribes would not like this. They would not like some guy going around killing their heroes, especially if it's a close fight all the time. After all, Chaos doesn't really have honor per se. Khorne has honor, but even then he's willing to throw honor away if it means betrayal, bloodshed, yada yada yada. And Kain is a vampire. He is unable to receive Chaos gifts. It would be interesting, don't hear me out, don't get me wrong, it would be very interesting to see Kain receiving Chaos gifts. After all, he does have Chaos armor. The issue is that Kain does not like serving demons. He does not like serving anybody. He's his own man. This would present a big problem. And he may receive buffs from Chaos Gods, but he would easily spit in their face at some point or another, and it's going to piss them off, and they're going to start giving him negative buffs. This is not a good situation at all for Kain. Eventually, he would get killed, whether it's by an entire army turning against him, or whether it's just by simply no one wants to follow him. So now he's just being surrounded constantly every day by champion after champion after champion after champion. Eventually, someone's going to get lucky and put him down, and then they're going to burn his body. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Kain has a lot of strong things about him that I have no doubt he could kill an emperor. He could kill the High King of the Dwarves. No doubt in my mind. He has so much at his disposal that he could do it. The problem is it's his personality. The problem is it's who he is at heart that could be the issue. Then finally we have Bretonnia. Now, why did I say Bretonnia would be a little easier? Well, you see, Bretonnia, the knights are usually busy questing all the time. They're usually too busy to really care about defending their citizens, their populace. So the idea that the knights would pretty much help their own civilians who are getting massacred, not really. Some of them would. And yeah, it would get attention in the court when those knights turn up dead. But really, it's not too much. Like, we see it all the time where in Bretonnia, huge swaths of beastmen or orc hordes lay waste to many peasant villages before the knights finally react. And they only react because now they're sieging their castle. But Kain, he's not really going to be doing that. Instead, he's going to be just kind of walking around, learning the cities, asking the peasants what they know. And if he does happen to come across a knight who's on his quest, or a knight errant who's searching for a way to make himself into a more official knight, he may just knock him out cold with his mace or with his magic, and then ask the guy several questions and figure out where he is in the world. And from here, he can figure things out. From here, he can go, oh, okay, so this is going on, this is going on. Now, the bright side about Bretonnia is that he wouldn't have to deal with witch hunters. He may not have to deal with them at all. But the downside is that he's got to deal with wood elves. And wood elves do not like vampires in the slightest. So here we have a bit of an issue. If he walks too close to their forest, they could put him down. And if he causes too much trouble in Bretonnia, the knights of Bretonnia can ride out of their cities and come fight him. Now you may think, oh, well, Kain could kill an emperor. Kain could kill Vlad possibly. He could kill a bunch of, like, Wulfric the Wanderer. What do these Bretonnia knights have that they do not? Well, they have the blessing of the lady, for one. And for two, they have armies at their disposal. And it does not surprise me at all if they decide to just say, screw honor, we're just going to have everybody attack his ass at once because he's such a threat. He's so strong that we have to deal with him. I would not doubt it. And I would say it would probably be a rough fight for everybody, including Kain himself. But I think that they would definitely, eventually, subdue him. Maybe even kill him. Burn him at the stake. But I think that they could definitely put him down long enough, like stake his heart or whatever, and then just leave his body there, thinking that they won. But eventually the body is going to re-heal itself. Eventually the stake is going to wither out of his corpse, and now he's going to be brought back to life. And then he's going to just simply say, okay, this area is way too deadly. let me go somewhere else. And he could end up in the Border Princes, or he could end up in the Empire, based on what he knows. And then we have a rinse and repeat where he meets vampires. Vampires do not like him, and they kill his ass. This seems to be more or less the end of Cain, is vampires. Being the last vampire in the world in Nosgoth, he was their savior, their bastion. But being just an ordinary vampire in the Warhammer universe where there's tons of vampires, he's more of a threat to them than he is a bastion. And here we have his ultimate demise. Even if he was able to, let's say, round up a few necromancers and have them raise an army for him, even if he was able to, let's say, subjugate a few vampires and make them serve him, the problem is that I have no doubt a vampire would eventually betray Cain and kill him for one simple reason, and one reason alone. You want to know what it is? He treats vampires the same way Nagash treats vampires. The same reason why Nagash doesn't have vampire followers is the same reason why Cain would not have vampire followers. Cain would be using the vampires as frontline troops, just like he would a skeleton or a zombie. Nagash did the exact same thing. So here you have a guy who, if he was allowed to grow his own army, if he was allowed, or if he somehow did beat a bunch of vampires and take over control of them, this is the issue they're going to encounter, where all of his vampire followers are going to start plotting against him, not because he's strong, not because he's their leader. They're going to plot against him for their survival. They're going to be like, yikes. I don't want to serve a guy who's going to put me in the front lines. This guy really doesn't see a difference between me and a zombie. So, yikers. This is not good for my health. This is not good for my immortality. We should probably get rid of this guy as quickly as possible. So let's say he does do something like that. Like, let's say he takes over a bunch of blood dragons. That's great for them. They love to fight. But the issue is that he fights to rule. They fight to free themselves of their curse. It's not exactly going to work. Let's say he takes over the Strigoi. Well, the Strigoi are more beast than man, so they probably wouldn't mind either being used in the front lines, but they would start to get annoyed that he keeps sending them in the front lines and using them as nothing more than just monsters. What if he takes over the Necrarchs, or if he takes over the Von Karsteins and the Lamians? Well, all three of them are going to be very upset indeed, when they're being told to grab a sword and get in the front lines with the zombies and the skeletons and the Vargeists. They're going to look at him and go, "Excuse me? Do you know who you're talking to here? Like, you're telling me to serve in the front lines? I'm much more powerful in the back lines, casting my magic or casting resurrection or whatever on our forces." And Cain would just simply go, if you were strong enough to hold that position, you'd be strong enough to serve in the front line as well. And this is, again, what's going to result in him being killed. Not by elves, not by humans. Nope, vampires. And that's ultimately the undoing of Cain, is other vampires. Besides that, this has been Freezer 700. I hope you guys enjoyed this very lengthy discussion. It was quite a long one, and I had to really think about it, like, crap, what territories would he exist in? What territories would he not exist in? And of course, Cathay would be a good one, but the problem is we don't know much about it, and Cain doesn't really seem like the enlightened shinobi type character. No, he really doesn't look like that at all. So, besides that, this has been Freezer 700. I'm out. See you guys next time. Peace.